this was my master's thesis, and I'm trying to condense this down to as simple as I can. So in essence, I studied QAnon to see kind of how the media environment and its various media channels, audiences, messages all played a factor in the group's growth. And I'm going to tag heavily Neil Postman, because I used his books Technopoly and Amusing Ourselves to Death as kind of my methodological analysis. So a brief about conspiracy theories. They exhibit this need for certainty. The reason we have conspiratorial thinking is because we want certainty. We don't like randomness, so we try to connect these often unrelated dots. And we're pattern-seeking individuals, but we try to discover this hidden knowledge about why these events happened and that kind of thing. So the one thing that's kind of nefarious or even insidious, to use that buzzword we keep using, about conspiracy theories is that they're hard to disprove. So while many of these theories that we hear them when they sound outlandish and that kind of thing, there's really oftentimes not concrete evidence to refute them. And that leads to what Karl Popper talked about with falsifiability, right? And which is, let's use the example, unicorns exist, all right? Just because we've never seen a unicorn does not necessarily mean that they don't exist, right? Now, I have seen a rhinoceros, which I could make the argument is a chubby unicorn, all right? Just saying. Another one is that Carl Sagan talked about his fire-breathing dragon in his garage and how it would be very difficult to disprove, because even if you could throw factual evidence, the person has a perception of this thing that you cannot see. So sometimes, like I said, trying to disprove them can be difficult. So the next question is that where does this information come from? Where does this data flow? For many believers, the ultimate issue stems from the information environment in which they live. This is quoting Sunstein and Vermeulen. They either have too much random information or they have too little verifiable data to focus or to parse through fact from fiction, or what Sunstein and Vermeulen call a crippled epistemology, wherein limited access to informational resources means the consumer either only has or only accepts a small portion of the information as authoritative. So a brief about QAnon. We've heard this word. I don't know, where I'm from, some people have never heard it, but they know the name, or they can't even pronounce it. What's that canon, QAnon started with these relatively innocuous and incoherent posts on anonymous message boards, 4chan, 4kun, 8kun. And then from there, they spread to social media sites such as Reddit and YouTube. They were picked up by social media influencers who then began to talk about it, and they were started to be shared on Facebook groups and things like that. It just started popping up. And then it was eventually picked up by traditional news sources and things like that. All right. One of the things about QAnon is that it has ties back to many previous conspiracy theories. It's been called a meta-narrative or a big tent conspiracy because it kind of brings all of them under one umbrella. And so one of those was the Pizzagate, if you're familiar with that. The guy, Edgar Welch, walked in and shot up the Comet Pizza because he thought that they were harboring children, right? So they've also brought in, the death of JFK Jr. in 1999 and said, that was somehow tied to all this stuff. These individuals, or likely individuals, according to one study, initiated, they had supposedly had Q clearance, Patriot, had this Q level clearance and all this other stuff. And they were going to shake the world with this new knowledge, this insider knowledge, which was, they believed that it was kind of this Manichaean divide, right? And if we were looking at cosmology, where the Democrats, Nancy Pelosi and Hillary Clinton, were harboring children, and it was a sex trafficking ring, and they were doing satanic rituals, and as outlandish as it sounds. I mean, this was the belief in some of these circles. All right. So Republicans good, Democrats bad. Donald Trump is the Messiah sent to save these children from this sex trafficking ring. All right. The interesting appeal was, in one particular nature, was its game-like it was like a game, all right? And some of the phrases used by Q were, enjoy the show, but dig deeper, do your own research, right? These were some of the phrases associated. So these people were gathering little bits, and they were watching news, and they were saying, hey, that looks like it's this, and Trump wore a yellow tie, that signifies this, right? So we're looking at these things, and they're trying to parse out meaning from unrelated items, but it supports their worldview. All right. Then armed with these informations, these breadcrumbs from these Q drops, they were taking and going on to Reddit and YouTube and things like that, and then telling the world about it. Some people were writing books about it. You saw they were using hashtags, where we go one, we go all. And the other thing is that as these people were beginning to get kicked off of different sites and being banned from sites, they started popping up on Parler and Gab and Vote and some of these other places that didn't have the controls that Facebook and Twitter had. So the group's use of media and these people's willingness to believe in something more than what meets the eye allowed it to be so pervasive. In cult-like fashion, followers of Q embraced the full participatory scope of the internet and media technology, making it the first crowdsourced conspiracy theory due to its networked infrastructure. I'm quoting several people in this. So in some ways, they don't have necessarily a crippled epistemology, but rather the opposite, an unfettered, unmoderated access to information resources. Aiding the QAnon phenomenon was this kind of group solidarity that often mimicked and plagiarized Christian doctrine. Going so far as to cite biblical scripture in some of their Q drops, they use terms like the Great Awakening and the Storm, and which harkens to other Christian eschatology. So these people were appropriating these religious feelings and these trappings to bring in an audience. Neil Postman viewed one of the things about media ecology is that it formulated in the 60s roughly, Marshall McLuhan and Neil Postman bringing these things into vogue. But I think that it is prime to try to evaluate what's going on. And Neil Postman viewed television as the command center of the new epistemology, whereby everything from politics to news, religion to science, and even education were shaped by its biases. All right, he believed that television had an influence on our environment that no other technology had, and considered it a metamedium, one of that directs our world, our knowledge of the world, and more importantly, our ways of knowing as well. So Postman in many ways foretold the coming of the internet age, where, like television before it, the internet permeates everything and often orchestrates our perceptions. Regarding the progression of technology through the course of humanity, Postman held that each new technology or innovation brought with it an agenda or an inherent bias, and every new technology had a way that it wanted to be used. Dr. Straight back there explained that the biases do not have absolute control over individuals and do not absolve them of personal responsibility. We often hear the criticism that, well, you're being a determinist. Well, maybe there's something to this. Instead, a bias represents a path of least resistance, wherein media ecologists are concerned with how this effect causes people to cede control to the biases of technology. All right, the internet has positive intentions of bringing people together and bringing information to our fingertips. But as Postman has pointed out, the technology can be used beyond its original intent. So considering this phenomenon, Postman believed that any technological change brought within it an inherent compromise, a Faustian bargain, to use his terminology. The changes sometimes created more than they destroyed, and destroyed more than they created. The repercussions are never one-sided, and there are always winners and losers. The question then becomes who wins and who loses, in what capacity and to what degree. So a couple of things about the people who are involved in QAnon. They were people who were seeking entertainment. All right, they were waiting on those Q drops. They were looking to put together the pieces like a role-playing game. Whether or not the QAnon, whether it was an intentional or not, QAnon reached a group of people who wanted to be entertained. Enjoy the show was one of the frequent phrases. Postman claimed that Americans are the best entertained and quite likely the most well-informed people the least well-informed people in the Western world. All right. So the way in which these Q followers disregarded information that could be verified and accepted that which was not verifiable indicated their willingness to kind of be led, or in Postman's terms, amused astray. Just as the game Trivial Pursuit uses information as a means of amusement, so too do our news sources, according to Postman. Another group of people that were involved in this, or that, according to their psychology, were people that wanted to believe in something bigger than themselves. All right? They wanted to feel like this was bigger than just themselves. QAnon reached people who, through the narrative of the mainstream media and what was being reported, and the algorithms of social media is what brought these people to this. Some of these people became radicalized to an extent that they became violent. We've got the January 6th event, but in my analysis, I list out a number of people through media sources from the media. Edgar Welch was one of them. Matthew Philip Wright, who went to the Hoover Dam with an armored truck. Anthony Comello, who shot Frank Calley, the media boss, all the way down to Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is a representative in my home state, who was led astray by all this stuff. She's still crazy. All right. So each of these individuals saw themselves as part of a grand narrative created by QAnon and its adherents. Whether it was vigilante justice and saving children from the satanic sex traffickers, or attempting to save democracy in America, many of these people involved in these crimes and others were informed, radicalized, and shaped by the media environments in which they live. And I go into more detail, but obviously I'm trying to move fast. So a particularly difficult condition of conspiracy theories, and especially QAnon as an all-encompassing conspiracy theory, is the near impossibility of verifying its claims. This is going back to Karl Popper. Turn with me. All right. And Carl Sagan's Fire-Breathing Dragon. Adrian LaFrance of The Atlantic had this massive article, and if you've read it, it's phenomenal, and it helped inform much of my analysis. But she illustrated that QAnon believers, that they believed a certain great awakening was coming and that nothing could stop it. The dogmatic belief means that every contradiction can be explained away. No form of argument can prevail against it. That's what she wrote in her article. So these individuals who have embraced QAnon have no answer for the question, what evidence would prove your claim false? Even if logic and evidence were presented, as seen with previous conspiracy theories, attempts to change people's minds often fall flat, or worse, they encourage these people to embrace their beliefs with more fervor. Worsening its effect is that many of these Q adherents followed their leaders, Q and other influencers, and scriptural references, the Q drops, with the same zeal that they previously followed their religion. Several studies indicated that there was an influx and a growth within religious communities, predominantly evangelical, from QAnon. And pastors were even trying to say, hey, look, don't get involved in this. And they're pleased, and but they fell flat. So this brings us to Postman, who said, again, who foretold of the era. For many of the Q followers, the information they gleaned from their computers and smart devices effectively became gospel. Postman's theory many years ago came to fruition in the media and informational environment surrounding QAnon. He said the computer shows has now become the equivalent of it is God's will, and maintains the same effect. Postman called the environment where information was limitless and often trivial a technopoly. A technopoly is, in this regard, opposite of a crippled epistemology due to its unregulated access to information. Postman believed the technopoly increased the available supply of information, which in turn strained control mechanisms. This led to a need for more control mechanisms, but these were often of a similar technological vein. The cycle becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, or a positive feedback loop of sorts, wherein the end result is a supply of information that is no longer controllable. When this happens, a breakdown in the social ecosystem occurs. Remembering the original media ecology metaphor of a petri dish containing a medium or a substance in which a culture grows being equated to media environments, Postman used the analogy of a biological immune system to illustrate what happens when a virus is introduced in the body. If the immune system is not functioning properly, the organism cannot manage cellular growth, which can have dire consequences for the organism. A human immune system, on the other hand, destroys unwanted cells to keep the organism well. Postman suggested that all societies have various mechanisms that function in the same manner as a biological immune system. These mechanisms maintain balance between old and new information, or bad and good information, by destroying the unwanted data. Not only was unbridled availability of information an effect of technopoly, but Postman also believed a society wherein the defenses against informational overload had broken down was another indication. One could argue that social media attempts to shut down or curb informational glut did little, because repairing the system with the very technologies that created it is similar to a person taking a pill for nausea after taking other pills that had made him nauseous in the first place. Postman argued that a social immune system had fallen ill when a culture overcome by information generated by technology tries to employ the technology itself as a means of providing clear direction and humane purpose. He argued that a problem with the human condition cannot be solved by technology. Postman wrote that people are not starving due to a lack of information. Crime and family dissolutions are not due to inadequate information. According to him, instant communication and limitless information have nothing to do with any of these problems and are largely useless in addressing them. So in my conclusion, I talk about the proliferation of QAnon cannot be separated from the media technologies used to birth it. Postman issued prophetically that technology would shape our epistemological environment when he wrote, "New technologies alter the structure of our interests, the things we think about. They alter the character of our symbols, the things we think with. And they alter the nature of community, the arena in which thoughts develop." Following this line of thinking, traditional media have been incorporated into newer platforms, ones with arguably more social influence due to their participatory nature. Zuckerman, who I heavily cite, suggested this convergence of media creates a new environment, one where non-professional individuals can report what's happening in their communities, amplify stories that might have otherwise been missed, and demand attention towards subaltern narratives. As illustrated in the lives of Ashley Babbitt, Anthony Comello, Marjorie Taylor Greene, among all the others that I list in my research, the media landscape in which they lived certainly influenced their thinking and amplified this subaltern narrative. Just as bacteria grows in a petri dish when aided by a medium, so too did QAnon in a 21st century media environment. Also akin to many bacteria, the effect had real-world costs. Schaffner in 2020 found that nearly 40% of survey respondents who said they trusted QAnon to provide accurate information also felt that their belief in Q had negatively affected their relationships with family members, friends, and others. So Beatty also noted, Beatty was another one I cited, also noted the strain on relationships when she interviewed pastors whose congregations were torn apart by sharing of verifiably false claims about actual human beings. The gradual spread of QAnon did not just affect fringe political actors or unhinged vigilantes, it also affected average human beings who were being caught up and wrapped up in this environment. For most of these individuals, they either limited their informational sources to a select few, thus creating their own crippled epistemology, or they could not critically parse through the informational glut in their technologically driven media environment. In either case, their environment was contaminated. DeZu et al., is another citation of mine, wrote that the problem of a media ecology polluted by conspiracy beliefs is not just that it might induce false belief, but that it contributes to an epistemological condition where the distinction between true and false itself is rendered increasingly moot. In this regard, individuals begin to care less about the veracity of information and only how it made them feel. Whether it was amusing and game-like, empowering and revolutionary, or hopeful and delivering. And I think that there's more to be said from media ecology perspective on this topic, and there's more to be researched in the future, but that was what I've got for now. Thank y'all.